Lugenia Burns Hope was a social reformer and community activist who worked tirelessly during her life to create change for African American citizens. Through her neighborhood union and other community service organizations, she improved the quality of life for African Americans in Atlanta, Georgia, and served as a model for future civil rights movement. Hope was born in St. Louis, Missouri on February 19, 1871. She was the youngest of 7 children born to Louisa M. Bertha and Ferdinand Burns. In the 1880s, her family moved to Chicago, Illinois. Hope attended schools such as the Chicago Art Institute, the Chicago School of Design, and the Chicago Business College. Lugenia Hope began her career as a social activist and community organizer by working at Hull House. Hull House was a settlement house co-founded in 1889 by Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr. The main purpose of Hull House was to provide social and educational opportunities for working class people in the surrounding neighborhood. Classes were held in literature, history, art, domestic activities, and many other subjects. Lugenia Burns married John Hope in 1897. The couple moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where her husband taught at Roger Williams University. While living in Nashville, Hope renewed her interest in working with the community by teaching physical education and crafts through local organizations. Next, the couple moved to Atlanta so that John could work at Atlanta Baptist College, which became Morehouse University, of which he later became president. Hope could have led a comfortable life as the wife of a college president, but she had ambitions of her own. In 1898, Hope convinced Morehouse College to provide space for a daycare and kindergarten. Hope also worked with a group of women to provide services to African American children, including community centers and recreational facilities. Seeing the high need in many poor communities throughout Atlanta, Hope enlisted the help of Morehouse College students to interview community members concerning their needs. From these surveys, Hope realized that many African Americans not only suffered from societal racism, but also a lack of medical and dental services, inadequate access to education, and lived in unsanitary conditions. In 1908, these efforts became Hope's Neighborhood Union, the first woman-run social welfare agency for African Americans in Atlanta. The organization offered medical, recreational, employment, and educational services to African Americans. The Neighborhood Union also worked to reduce crime in African American communities and spoke out against racism and Jim Crow laws. In 1913, Hope was elected chairperson of Women's Civic and Social Improvement Committee, an organization that works to improve the education for African American children in Atlanta. Hope was also a founding member of the Atlanta branch of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. Through her club work, she became involved in national reform activities, particularly in the efforts to challenge racial discrimination within various reform organizations. In 1920, Hope led a challenge to the practices of segregation and white domination within the National YWCA. She was appointed the Special War Secretary for the YWCA's War Work Council in 1917. In this role, Hope trained Hostess House workers for the return of African American and Jewish soldiers. Hope was a member of the Association of Southern Women for the Prevention of Lynching, which was a women's organization in Atlanta, Georgia. This was an interracial effort aimed at creating a national bill to prohibit lynching and mandating the prosecution of local law officials that engaged in it. Lugenia Burns Hope was also a member of the International Council of Women of the Darker Races. Hope's style went beyond the traditional racial politics of the period. She sharply criticized the widespread belief that Black Americans had to prove their readiness for citizenship. In 1927, Hope was appointed to the Colored Advisory Commission by President Herbert Hoover. In this role, she also organized citizenship schools that offered 6 weeks classes on voting, democracy, and the U.S. Constitution. Hope worked with the American Red Cross and discovered that African American victims of the Great Flood of 1927 were faced with racism and discrimination during the relief efforts. In 1932, Hope became the first vice president of the NAACP's Atlanta chapter. During her term, Hope managed the development of citizenship schools, which introduced African Americans to the importance of civic participation and the role of government. John Hope died in 1936 and Lugenia moved to New York. She became the assistant to Mary McLeod Bethune, director of the Negro Affairs for the National Youth Administration. Lugenia Burns Hope died on August 14, 1947, but her legacy lives on. The Lugenia Burns Hope Center was founded in 1994 with the help of President Barack Obama. The center is a leadership development and organizing institute for Blacks that reside on the south side of Chicago. In 1996, Lugenia Burns Hope was inducted as a member of the Georgia Women of Achievement. Lugenia Burns Hope was a model for empowerment and should be an inspiration to everyone in the social work profession. She was a true leader for social reform and a champion for African Americans fighting for justice and equality.